It's the Oslo Esports Cup, and we have a monster matchup, Le Quang Liem with the white pieces taking on the world champion Magnus Carlsen. Le opens with d4, and after a few pawn moves, we have a classic Benoni structure on the board. Black has challenged the center right away. White builds a powerful pawn duo on d5 and e4, controlling the center. Magnus fianchettos his dark-squared bishop to g7, preparing to fight back on the queen side. White continues to develop, kicking black's knight on f6 around the board with a g4 pawn push. Magnus brings his queen out to e7 to support his position. Le castles his king to safety and then tucks it away on h2. Magnus launches his h-pawn forward to disrupt white's king side, then finally castles as well. White wants to prepare an attack on the g-file, but this next move is a slight inaccuracy, letting black right back into the game. There was a much more precise way to continue. The correct move was queen to d2, preparing for black's pawn break to f6, then knight to h4, pawn takes on g5, and knight takes the pawn on g6, keeping a solid advantage. But back in the game, Le instead plays the rook to g1, and now Magnus has a chance to equalize. And Magnus seizes the moment. He immediately pushes his pawn to f6, challenging the center. White's knight hops to h4, and black's knight leaps into the beautiful e5 square. The bishops are traded, and the position is on fire. Le can't resist snatching the pawn on g6 with his knight. It looks tempting, but this is another slip, allowing Magnus to unleash a devastating attack. And here it comes. Rook takes the pawn on f2, check. A brilliant exchange sacrifice, the only move to keep the pressure on and rip open the white king's position. And the point is this. After the king is forced to h1, the queen comes to f7, and if white captures the h5 pawn, the knight can simply drop back to f8, and black's attack is overwhelming. But Le bravely steps his king out to g3, Magnus follows up with queen to f7, and white's queen grabs the loose pawn on h5. The attack is raging, and right here, Magnus Carlsen makes a shocking critical mistake that completely throws the game away. He had a winning path forward, but missed it. The correct move was knight takes the pawn on g5. After knight to e7 check, queen takes the knight, the king recaptures the rook on f2, and a knight check on h3 continues the assault, leaving black with a decisive advantage. But instead of that, Magnus plays his rook to f4, a stunning blunder that allows his own piece to get trapped, and the advantage swings decisively back to white. But Le misses the most clinical punishment. He plays bishop to e2, letting Magnus off the hook. The immediate knight to e2 would have trapped and won the rook on the spot, and now Magnus misses his chance to punish the mistake. He plays knight to f8, but the amazing bishop to d7 would have set up a queen trade that wins a rook and saves the game. Le finally plays. Knight takes rook on f4, capturing the stranded piece. Pawn takes knight on f4, check. An excellent recapture from Magnus, the only move to keep fighting by forcing the white king away. The king moves to h2, and black's knight jumps to g6 to defend. The rooks reposition, and Magnus starts creating counterplay by pushing his b-pawn. White has a strong position, but once again misses the most precise continuation. The move played gives black too much counterplay. The engine screams for pawn, takes pawn on b5 immediately. After the recapture, knight takes the pawn on b5, bishop to e5, and knight to a3 simply wins a clean pawn for white. But in the game, Le plays bishop to g4, and this allows Magnus to get right back in it. Bishops are traded on g4, and Magnus correctly pushes his b-pawn to b4, creating a dangerous passed pawn. White's knight retreats, and black develops his rook and bishop. Le brings his rook over to g4 to aid the attack, while Magnus pushes his c-pawn, creating yet another threat on the queen side. The h-pawn marches forward, forcing black's queen to h7 for defense. The white king steps to h3, and after some maneuvering, white delivers a queen check on e6. Black's king is under pressure, and this next move is a serious mistake, allowing white to create a decisive attack on the other side of the board. King to h8, rook to f3 pawn, to a5, knight to f2 pawn to c3. Instead, in the game, Magnus plays his king to g7, and this walks right into white's plan, and Le immediately pounces. Rook to c2 attacks the weak pawn, which black is forced to push forward to c3. Pawn takes pawn on c3. A fantastic move from Le, the only way to completely shut down black's counterplay and secure a winning advantage. Black's passer is stopped. He pushes his b-pawn and moves his king to h8, but white is now completely in control of the game. White's rook takes the pawn on b3. This is a small slip, giving Magnus a glimmer of hope if he can find the right response. But pawn to f3 is not it. This move doesn't help. The correct idea was queen to c7, creating counter threats and getting back in the game. White improves his position, bringing the knight to f2, eyeing weak squares around the black king. Magnus feels the pressure and makes another inaccurate move, misplacing his bishop and allowing white's advantage to become overwhelming. The correct idea was knight to f4 with check. Rook would have to take the knight, bishop recaptures the rook, and after a queen move, bishop to e3 would win material back for black, but instead Magnus plays his bishop to f4, and after this, white's passed pawn becomes unstoppable. White pushes the pawn to c4, it's a tiny inaccuracy, but the position is still completely winning for Lee, and bishop takes pawn on g5 is the final desperate mistake. This capture completely ignores white's main threat, and now the game is over. Queen takes the pawn on d6. A crushing blow. White is now up material with an unstoppable attack. Black is in a hopeless position, and this last move just speeds up the end. There was a slightly more resilient defense. King to g8, rook to b8, rook takes rook on b8, queen takes rook on b8. Check king to f7, but in the game, Magnus plays his rook to g8, which allows an even more brutal finish. And there it is. The final move, rook to b8. This attacks the black rook on g8 and threatens checkmate. There is simply no defense, and at this moment Magnus Carlsen resigns. Quang Liem takes the game. The world champion saw that there was no way to stop the coming attack, because white is simply winning a full rook. If black tries knight to f4 check, the king simply steps to h2. The queen moves to f7, but then rook takes the rook on g8 is a crushing check, and after the king recaptures, white is up a piece with an easy win.